good to see you all this afternoon at the Independent School for the City. My name is Simone Rots. I'm part of the staff of the Independent School for the City. And before Frans Ziegler is going to introduce our special guest for today, Vikram, I will tell you a bit about the Independent School for the City, because I see some familiar faces, but also many that are here for the first time, I think. So just to explain where you are at the Independent School for the City, which is a school for people who already went to school. So for all of us, probably. And with Crimson, our office, we initiated this school in some years ago, 2018, because we thought that it's necessary to have a place where you can reflect on and learn from the city and all the challenges that are happening at the moment on an urban scale, to address those in a way, in an interdisciplinary, activistic, sometimes critical way. And we use, this is our subtitle, Research, Story, Strategies, Action. So this is the method that we use. So starting with research, then finding the stories, making strategies, and also action is very important in all of this. We are a school, but we are also a hangout. So we have, like today, we have public events like today, but we have workshops, studios, different projects, events the whole year through, which sometimes are one day or an afternoon, and sometimes 2 weeks, but then on different, on an evening and 2 days, for example. And also we always want to have, we have a bar, like you probably have seen, so it's also a place where you can reflect on what we had discussed earlier, and maybe we are going to do that also after this nice afternoon. We also have an agenda, so we have, hoe kan dat? Gebeurt dat nu net? Oh jee. So there are 3 program lines we address as a kind of context for all the projects that we do. So maybe some of you, I think you recognize the project. Yeah. So the Anthropocene, in which we address the climate change, circularity, post-growth city, and beneath you see the different projects that we have done during all the years, because we're also working on the projects in a kind of incremental way. So everything that we learn, we are going to further discuss and address, so it's a place to learn, especially. Then the other very important theme is Right to the City, so the affordability of the city in all its aspects. And also here you see again the different projects that could be arranged under this theme. And then migration, of course, with the super diversity city Rotterdam is, because we use Rotterdam always as a pass pro toto for all the projects that we have, because there's so much going on here, and we think that it's it can reflect discussions and challenges in the world. Then we also like to work with our hands, so we do also craftivism workshops, weaving, working with different materials. Like action, working also in reality on things that you want to work on, or you want to learn. An important event that I want to address for the public events are the Schools Out. So every last Friday of the month, we have a Schools Out in which we invite a lecture, somebody who gives a lecture, something like today, and then afterwards we are going to have drinks also, and sometimes there are 80 people, sometimes 100 and sometimes 20, but it's really nice also to come out at these evenings. Just to give you some examples, now just the program that we are going to do from now until July, the beginning of July, because in July and August we are closed. The next Schools Out is the 26th of June, so the last Friday of June. Then we have 2 speakers, Holly Schmidt and Alva Godby, and they have, and it's a cooperation with Verso Books, and they have both just delivered a publication on the different aspects of the housing, politics of housing. I think it will be very interesting, so it's in 2 weeks from now. Next week we will start Livehouse, which is the a cooperation with Stad in de Maak, in which we will work on an actual case study with Stad in de Maak, and this one, it's something like this. It's not this object, but another object. Then the last event before the holidays is Harbors Are for Swimming, in which we will address the possibilities of swimming in Rotterdam, in the Maas. 3 and 4 July. So we are very looking forward to this, because we also want to swim together at the closing event, the last day. And then we also have a public lecture, The Pool is Cool, which is a project by Paul Steinbroek from Belgium. A very interesting project they do on a kind of mobile swimming pool, which they make in difficult parts of cities. And then to give an insight in the things that we are going to do after the summer, in September, we will start again with the Film and Architecture Studio, which we have done from the beginning with Jordan Hollander, who is the initiator from Architecture Film Festival Rotterdam. So it's very nice. You make your own movie, and you will be taught about film and architecture, and the movies will also be shown over here. It's always a very nice evening. So this is what I want you to tell. For now, we are going to have a great lecture from Vikram Prakash, and Frans Schickler will introduce you. So the floor is yours, and I hope you all have a nice evening, and see you later, maybe at the bar.
I don't have name. Simone, thank you so much. All of Crimson and School for the City, thank you so much for inviting Vikram. And it's an honor for me to introduce you, Vikram. I've not really introduced a lecture of yours, whereas we've met so many times. This year we are celebrating, Vikram and I, our 36th year of knowing each other and friendship, so that's very special. Vikram is a professor in Seattle of architecture, but he comes from Chandigarh, and you all read that in the notice. And we are lucky that we have a direct flight from Amsterdam to Seattle and from Amsterdam to Delhi. So this is his main stop while going back and forth to India and back. And so we have wonderful meetings. Vikram is a great storyteller. I'm going to keep this introduction very short, because he's the one that can really talk about Chandigarh. He grew up in Chandigarh, 1963 born, and that was only 12 years after Le Corbusier first went to India. So it's like an amazing time. It must have been an amazing time when there was a lot of buzz. A new capital was made for Haryana and Punjab, the two northern states of India. He will hopefully talk a little bit about that. And his father, who was an architect, joined the team in 1952. That's 1 year after Le Corbusier started. So there was a lot of things happening, and a lot of interesting people meeting. I think many people know the story from knowing Corbusier and how Chandigarh happened. But more and more, there are new layers to that story, and Vikram has definitely contributed to that, because now we can see that there was not only Le Corbusier, but there's this team of important and very talented people, amongst them his father. So we met in 1992, 1990, first in Delft, but in India in 1992, and that was also the first time when I met his father in Chandigarh. It was a very special moment to be hosted by your family and meeting your father. And that happened again in 2007, when I took a group of architects and scholars, amongst them Arnold Rijndorp. He's the only one here who also met Aditya Prakash, the father. And that was an amazing moment, because he actually stood in the museum in front of the map of Chandigarh and explained it almost like it was just designed yesterday. It was a very passionate moment. And it was a year before he actually passed away, so it's special that we did experience that. In 2013, Vikram had taken students from University of Washington to Chandigarh on one of the many studio trips that you did. I think, Marek, you also do it, take students abroad for studies. But how special it is if you're studying in Seattle and you can actually work on the projects of Chandigarh under Vikram. And on that trip, Fritz Palmboom joined me. We were on the jury together, and we met Michelle at that point. So I'm just saying, Chandigarh is really the place where you meet good people. And everybody should go. We meet almost every year after that, and it's been fantastic, Vikram. But for this audience, I'd like to say that every time we meet, I hear a new layer of the story of Chandigarh. There's always new anecdotes. There are new stories about so-and-so met so-and-so. Only recently we knew much more about Yuli Chowdhury, who there are some fans in the audience. Katja is here. She's doing PhD on her, amongst the people. So I think that's your great strength. And I'm going to end with the books. Two books I only brought from my library. The first one, which he wrote as a master thesis, Chandigarh's Le Corbusier. What a title. You know, everybody thinks Chandigarh is designed by Le Corbusier, but Chandigarh made Le Corbusier. Yes. So he's a master in flipping it around and rethinking all that. And the second one is his last album, one continuous line about his father, and you'll hear much more about it. I'm going to make sure that both these books can be bought and or ordered at NIE Bookshop with Joost, our favorite bookshop. We will make sure that these books are in the shop after this lecture. I'm sure you want to buy it. Vikram, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Coming to Rotterdam is certainly returning home always for me. I have been coming to Holland and this city for so long, so it's wonderful. I think usually I end up lecturing at Delft or something. I don't think I've ever lectured here in Rotterdam itself, although this is unquestionably my home. So thank you all for being here, for braving the train strike or whatever is going on. So it's wonderful for you all to be here. And I'm going to present to you an argument that I have been sort of developing for a couple of years now. And what it is around this idea of non-alignment. And the reason is because this book is actually going to be re-editioned by Bloomsbury. It's going to come out next year. And we decided with Bloomsbury that it wouldn't be a cut-paste job, that we would completely rethink the book. So a lot of the, I'd say about 50-60% of the material will be the same. And whereas this is more or less an introduction to the archive, this next book has this argument. I'm trying to reflect on, now that I have written the biography, how do I emplace it and argue it in the world? So I've been developing this argument for a while, and today I am going to present it for the very first time. All right. So we'll see how that goes. So I'm talking about, of course, doesn't work when you need it to work. Is this not still plugged in? Where did that thing go? Oh, that this one. Yeah, this also has to be in there, I think. Here, I got it. I think just go in here and we're good. All right. We'll see. Hopefully that'll work. So, there he is. So Aditya Prakash, 1924-2008, on the left, just like days after he joined the Chandigarh Capital Project in 1952. And the second picture I took of him, like literally months before he passed away in 2008. So I am presenting the narrative of this person who went from this to that, and one might argue it simply as a narrative of what he did, which is an extensive oeuvre over his long time in India and even before that. He built, I think, I don't know the exact number, about somewhere between 80 and 100 buildings. He produced urban plans, he produced a whole series of art. And it was all within the modernist vocabulary. So when so his entire architectural archive and his documents are all at the Canadian Centre for Architecture in Montreal. So I gave them over 2,000 drawings and about 8 linear feet of material. So it's an extensive archive, and this doesn't include anything of his period in the Capital Project Office, because that all sits in the official archives of the government of Punjab. So one can look at it that way, you know, and in a sense this book does this. But how do you tell the story? Another way to tell the story is to look at the sort of character of the work that he did. You know, of course he was an architect, but he was also an urban planner. He also invested and worked on informal settlements and the entire informal economy. He wrote books. He did sculpture, he designed furniture, and he had an extensive body of art. He also performed in plays. So the title of this book was called One Continuous Line, in part because he was obsessed with the continuous line. He just loved that. Like, how many ways could a line go? And you know, that's an architectural sort of obsession. At least those of us who used to make drawings like this remember that you could make that little detail, and then the line would go, and it would go for 5 hours, and then it would make a little, yeah, Fritz, and of course, a master at that. But for those of you who are younger, I don't know if you know what this is, but it's a joy of a certain kind, which certainly manifested itself. So he was obsessed with the continuous line, but the book was started off as a search for what is the line that went through all of this? What was the search? What was the quest? What was it that was going on? And that is sort of the project that I'm still, in a sense, looking on today. Of course, you might simply, traditionally, this project, this search, this continuous line search that is looked at is described as the narrative of modernism, right? Which is the narrative of Corbusier, Jeanneret, Maxwell Fry, Jane Drew, occupying the grand center of a vast post-colonialist project with this huge retinue of supporting staff, if you want. And one could tell, not unjustifiably, the story in this manner. And that would be my Aditya Prakash right there. And this is all very strictly hierarchically organized. And so that's maybe one narrative. But as Franz pointed out, the book the narrative that I, with a lot of other people, some of them in the room, have been talking about is how does one decolonize, how does one decenter is the word I prefer, this sort of emplacing not only of the narrative of Chandigarh, but the story of modern architecture itself. You know, we are sort of, there's an old narrative about how things started in Bauhaus or whatever, and traveled around the world. But we have been for a while talking about a global decentered narrative and network of modernism. So I try in my early work to sort of set up the story of the making of Chandigarh as the narrative of the part of what was going on in India in the immediate aftermath of its independence in 1947, which was dominated by the personality and contextual, political, and intellectual mindset of, one can use as a shorthand the person of Jawaharlal Nehru, who was the first prime minister of the country and the first, really, if you want, architect, not only, as I will argue, of the country, of the nation, of the idea of the nation state, but also who built its institution, and through that entire production articulated a vision of India in the world, and indeed of another world to come itself. Okay, so this is the argument that in a sense I'm going to try and make and present for you and try and understand this work. This argument was most recently developed, quickly to say, in this exhibition that we just did a few months ago in the Corbusier Museum in Chandigarh, in which we showed the work of my father, Aditya Prakash, a series of other architects, Jeetlal Malhotra, Shivdat Sharma, where we had original panels that we found of B.P. Mathur from Punjab University, and where we had also artwork and drawings of all other kinds. All right. This exhibition was called Chandigarh's Indian Modernists. And the people that we were looking at, besides Aditya Prakash, were A.L. Fletcher, the man who wrote the brief for the city, Prabhavalkar, who designed kind of half the assembly, B.P. Mathur, who designed at least about 40, 50 of the buildings in Chandigarh, including the university, J.K. Chowdhury, who did half the campus before he left to Delhi to make IIT, Jeetlal Malhotra, who built a series of all the stadiums, etc. It would take too long for me to go through. M.N. Sharma, who took over as chief architect, M.S. Randhawa, who was the commissioner, P.L. Verma, P.N. Thapar, these were the main administrators, Shivdat Sharma, who inherited, and of course, very significantly, Yuli Chowdhury. It's alphabetically put, so there is no other organization to this, just to be clear. We were happy that we had, we showed, like for instance, like these are projects made by B.P. Mathur. This is a competition project that he did. And this never got built. He never, Raj Rival got that project. But it's not clear here, unfortunately. The resolution is, I need to work on the resolution. It's an incredible project, beautiful project. So it's not just like, well, this is the buildings we did. We are talking about an ethos, an aesthetic, ethic, and intellectual sensibility. We made a timeline that had never been made, and brought in objects such as the sculptures that were made by M.N. Sharma, and put this all together, including the documents that were part of the show. So, and the sub-theme that we organized this whole exhibit was on the idea of building modern life. All right. So that's basically the argument, that Chandigarh was not about building a city or a series of buildings or a 16-part hierarchy of housing government officers or making magnificent institutions of state. All that is true. But in the end, what they were trying to do was not execute a known project, but were trying to imagine something not yet known. This is the critical difference that is to be known. And we therefore placed at the center a kind of a life picture, which had furniture, painting, art, in the context of everything else that was there. So over here, for instance, you see this table by B.P. Mathur, and that's the same painting with that photograph over there in one of the houses. And these are the chairs by Aditya Prakash, and those are those chairs over there in that home. So that's what this is. I'd love to get this exhibition somewhere here. So if you have ideas, well, we should talk. As Franz noted, that's me. I just wanted to establish that although I make, big arguments about non-alignment and this, that, and the other, in the end, I'm talking about my daddy. Yeah. So keep that in mind. And I have done, this book on him, and through a lot of literature, I have tried to basically build a narrative. How do you understand a life? Anybody's life. As a historian, this is always a question, right? That how do you tell the narrative of a person? Well, you can do it in the old manner and say the grand narrative of the person and their intentions, and that's true. It's not false. But the question always is, what was it about life and history and context and circumstance that produced a person's agency, why they did what they did, and then carried and continued and transformed and remade what they did? So a life and its context is the story, and that's what I'm trying to do. So for the rest of today, I'm going to maintain that conceit that I'm going to try and walk you through his life, but each time I'm going to try and produce an envelope around it which tries to make a reading and a claim about the context in which he worked. And that's the larger claim, which in one sense is the most important thing. So the first part, so Aditya Prakash was born in colonial India. But he was born in colonial India, in which the core driver economically was colonial employment, where the sort of upper class, not the upper class, sort of the progressive intelligentsia of the country sought to mediate between what they considered to be important aspects of modernization while transforming their own sense of locality. All right. So his mother died young, when he was only 8 or 9 years old. So he was brought up in a joint family. But his father was an Arya Samaji, which meant he belonged to a progressive reform Hindu movement. English was spoken, everybody knew English, but at home there was a strict joint family system that ran the family. So this was the schism in which he was born. And he wanted to do art, but that was not allowed to him as a male. Of course, you can't really do that. So he went to the Delhi Polytechnic, and he said, I want to do art. And they said, well, how about architecture? He barely heard about it. He knew engineering, didn't want to do engineering. So that's how he got into the program in architecture at the Polytechnic, which later on became the School of Planning and Architecture, if you all know the schools of architecture in India. Well, some nodding heads, so that's good. In 1947, when India became independent and the British left, the entire faculty of the Delhi Polytechnic, the British faculty, left. And when they left, they said, well, if you can find your way to London, we will help you establish. So, in 1947, at the famous stroke of the midnight hour, on August 14th, 15th, when India became independent, if you know the Nehruvian speech, Aditya Prakash was on the HMS Franconia, a Cunard Line ship, beautiful, slick, modernist. These are the people who made the proverbial ships of the 20s and 30s, including the Titanic, but let's not talk about that. And it had been used as a army supply ship during army troop movement trip in the Burma sector. So it was beat up, but had a sense of luxury built into it. And he got on that ship and arrived in London. This is one of his watercolors that he made for exhibition at the AA in Bedford Square. So what was it like to be in London in 1947 to 52 for a young South Asian, mixed, sort of this complex post-colonial, immediately after independence, right? On the one hand, what do I have next? Actually, we have a very detailed sense of his life and times. He kept a diary every day. And he kept it all the way to 1954-55. So even until he joined the Capital Project. And a lot of time could be spent on that, but it tells of a life where if he's obsessed with himself, he was a young man, but he runs into a milieu which on the one hand is dominated by the idea that, well, if you wanted independence, why did you come to London then? On the other hand, there was a milieu which where people were like, yeah, okay, here's what London is about. Here's how you can get the best things. Here's the progressive stuff. Here's the literature. Here are the people to read, and so on and so forth. So he was caught in this mixed milieu of the immediate war. All right. So you can find pretty extensive documentation of that. And he, on the one hand, felt very alone and separated, but on the other hand, he was completely and totally immersed into the intellectual, cultural, aesthetic, and performance art world of London, particularly its free theatre, which is a fantastic thing, right? I think it still is there. I'm not sure if theatre is still free in London. This is the context he was in. Very recently, not very recently, Dipesh Chakrabarty has talked about this time as a kind of an the circumstances of people at this time. Dipesh Chakrabarty describes as the international global circuit of anti-colonial humanists, all right? So there are the colonialists, and then there are the anti-colonial humanists who are trying to build an international culture out of the possibilities of colonial movement. And I think that this is a significant and important thing. In particular, if we don't want to spend too much time to this, one can seize on figures like Mulk Rajanand. Mulk Rajanand was a novelist and multidisciplinary thinker. And people like Minette de Silva over here. These were all sort of middle to upper classes, similar type of people who sought out and looked for an international culture that did not see them only as colonial or post-colonial subjects. It was never possible to not be seen that way, but there was also this culture of the possibility of seeing as internationalist. And I think that this is important in many ways, because it was this culture that sought to not to undo already in their own ways what we call a Eurocentrism. Yeah? So there's a lot to be talked about, but one simple example, which is now well documented and kind of celebrated in a lot of architectural history, is the fact that in 1922, there was a Bauhaus exhibition held in Calcutta. And this happened Because Rabindranath Tagore, who was a great Indian intellectual and poet and Nobel Prize winning philosopher and architect and painter and so on and so forth, playwright, was traveling Europe to look for designs of universalist, internationalist schools of art and aesthetic education. And he was invited to visit the Bauhaus. And Paul Klee and that sort of first generation of Bauhaus people said, "Oh my God, you the man." All right? And you know, there's a lot of story and, you know, written about this. So what I'm trying to point out is that particularly, not just in the Anglophone culture, which was more complicated, but there was a complete sort of ethos in the Austro-Hungarian Empire side of Europe, which was deeply interested in Indic philosophy and Indic ways of thinking, not as archaeology and history, but as outliers, as outliners of thinking the present and the future. One example, for instance, amongst this are the Theosophists, who were trying to build an international religion, right? And so you find people like Mahatma Gandhi in their journey from becoming this barrister that he was into the Mahatma Gandhi that he became. His journey actually goes through Thoreau, Emerson, Ruskin, Annie Besant, and so on and so forth. And these are the sort of figures that Gandhi openly and happily is amalgamating into his conceptions of like, for instance, many of the terms, like, for instance, Gandhi took, came from Henry David Thoreau, who was an Americanist thinker of the 19th century, working with Emerson. So the long and short of it here is that this milieu that Prakash was in part a classically colonial milieu dedicated and dominated by class and colonial thinking. But it was also shot through by the search for not a simple current style DEI representative, well, let's just make sure everybody's on the table, but a kind of a modernist desire to synthesize a series of ideas in search of an as yet unknown tomorrow to come. And I would certainly, and so when you see Mahatma Gandhi, or now as we will see Nehru or somebody articulating a vision for India, they are not looking to be different, and they're not looking to be Western. They are looking to identify and outline a world that is still hopefully to come. And a world not just for India, but an internationalist order. And this is the only way to understand Mahatma Gandhi, for instance, in outline, is that when he said satyagraha and non-violence, he didn't mean for India. He meant for everyone, everywhere, all the time. So this is so it was that kind of a search that was going on. So after becoming an ARI BA and having to give up his wonderful German emigre girlfriend Yvonne Silberman for many years, whom his family refused to accept, in 1952, my father found out that a certain Le Corbusier was building a brand new Nehruvian city in India, and he wrote to Maxwell Fry and said, "Max, looks like you've got a good project going. I got degree, you wanna hire? Yes, no." Well, not quite like that way, but the letter is there in the archives. And he got the job. So when he headed back, he was entering, what was he joining? All right? You can say he was joining Corbusier and Jeanneret's team. He was. But from his perspective, what he was going to do was join this project, let this be a new city. It was the Nehruvian vision of building a future, all right, in this internationalist context. So, and for Nehru, he was a big supporter of course, Corbusier, and here, this whole book can tell you the whole story about Corbusier, so that's a different lecture, all right? But that wasn't the Nehruvian project. The Nehruvian project was to empower this group of people and say, all right, I'm giving you a jump start, but now you gotta continue the project. And the project is not the project of catching up with the West. The project is going beyond it. To give expression to that, the best way, I think, to understand it is to know what Nehru was doing in the mid-1950s. Nehru, Nasser, Tito of Yugoslavia, Sukarno, Indonesia, U Thant in Burma, Nkrumah, so many other people whom we think quite correctly as basically upperclassmen in an international order. Yes, that's what they were. But these were also people who were looking to create a new way, not a new way, but were looking at how the world was set up and were looking to improve it. Let's put it simply. And in the context of the Cold War in the 1950s, when bombs were being exploded left, right, and center, well, in the Pacific and Texas or wherever else, and Siberia, where the Russians were exploding them. Well, France was exploding in Bikini Island, yeah. So I don't know, were the Dutch exploding any bombs? No, you didn't get around to it, but anyway, you had. Now you regret it, now that Trump's not. We are not going to talk about Trump, okay. So, this position that the non-aligned movement took was not of neutrality. It was not an idea to make a third power bloc different from the communist bloc and the capitalist bloc. But rather, the argument was that they were, that they argued that the reason they are not joining the capitalist or the communist blocs is because they are both wrong. They have a lot of good things to, but they think that the modernist, universalist, internationalist project has come down to a choice, as if it's cooked and known and done. You can pick the capitalist version or you can pick the communist version. Which side are you on? They said both are wrong. They all have something going on and something interesting, but the work is still yet to be completed. So that was the agenda of the non-aligned movement. All right. A series of countries joined it. You can see them. This is the long history of the non-aligned movement. And in fact, the argument that they made was the Cold War used to be known as the two-world theory. You join the communist world or the capitalist world, and the non-aligned movement said, no, we are going to make a third world. That is the origination of the phrase third world. I don't know if it makes its journey around here in Dutch or not. But because it was mostly only countries from the former post-colonies that were struggling against capitalist and communist hegemony, that took on the project of building the third world, that in time, the phrase third world, from being instead of a statement of aspirant non-aligned modernism and universalism to come, became the moniker of poor countries. So, not Devesh Chakravarti, but who's the professor at Princeton, Indian professor? Vikram Prakash, for instance, on this whole topic. He hates the term non-aligned movement. And he told me, no, you have to talk about this as the third world movement. And I understand what he's trying to say, that the whole thing is dedicated towards building a modernism yet to come. So the interesting thing is that besides politics, there was an entire cultural kind of wing that went with the non-aligned political movement. There were artist conferences, there were writers' conferences, there were architectural conferences, there were a whole series of these conferences that took place in Yugoslavia, in Egypt, in Indonesia, in Burma, in West Africa, North Africa, numerous parts, with the idea of creating not just a political future that was different, but also a cultural and intellectual outlining of what that future is. All right. And in all cases, well, not all cases, but by and large, predominantly, they all took on both the ethos and the aesthetics of modernism. This was always colored in modernist ideology and ways of thinking about the world. And indeed, so this is why, when you put non-aligned as a political movement, and then you look at its cultural wing, and you put those two things together, you get the phrase non-aligned modernism. So it's not just a sort of retrospective claim to a certain kind of intellectuality. It is actually well grounded in a serious political movement, all right, and a vision about the possibility of living in a certain kind of world, which has been lost in our memory because of the Cold War, and then America won the Cold War, and now you know where we find ourselves because of that disaster. There are people writing about this from art history, basically, and I just wanted to show you there are books, and my book's coming. Again, a figure that's interesting over here to look at is that of Mulk Rajanand. Mulk Rajanand, besides being a writer, formed with Anil and Minette de Silva. These are the sisters, Anil and Minette, and Otto Königsberger. And perhaps some of you know the story of Otto Königsberger. I won't go into it much, but he was also a Jewish German on the run from the Nazis, who ended up in India and built a series of cities, modernist cities in India. Came together and made this magazine called MARG, Modern Architectural Research Group. And the objective of this was to imagine the possibilities of modern life. And over its first 10 years, it tried to create an ethos of what an architecture, and by architecture, MARG did not just mean buildings. Sorry for the very narrow definition that we have now. They meant art, music, culture, theater, literature, everything. For them, architecture was the umbrella group in the old classic modernist sense. And they saw the building of Chandigarh as the sort of culmination of this project. And indeed, MARG had Le Corbusier, Frank Lloyd Wright, and Patrick Geddes and several other people writing in its pages in 1946 and 47, well before Chandigarh was imagined or conceived or any of these people hired to build the city. So they were quoted and asked to write in MARG to start imagining the possibilities of what this is. And long short, I just put this in because we talked about Bauhaus earlier. Here's Mulk Rajanand in one of his earliest editorials saying, we need to redo Bauhaus. We just need to do it. That's a great project, because basically he was channeling Tagore to say, well, Tagore did Shantiniketan in Calcutta, Gropius did, and Co did the Bauhaus in here. We just need to do it again, but this time we'll get it right. Okay, this is very different argument from saying, oh, the great Bauhaus, can we do a regional version of this? the question that they were going. Okay, so it's not just making things different. It is the dedicated quest to a universalist thing. It's not a catch-up. It's designing modern life. It's not post-colonial nationalism, which is the big problem that we have today in places like India, but an ongoing and global planetary. I've put in planetary to use a cool contemporary term. It was always the search for a globality, a future to come. Okay. Oh, sorry. Sorry to take. How long have I been going? Is it too long already? Okay. This was a research institute, so I figured, historians running the place, we have to do history, can't just show pictures. Okay? But now we will shift. I've set up the framework, which is important for me. Last slide. I just wanted you to know. Corbusier was a non-aligned modernist. All right? Moment he heard about Nehruvian politics, he's like, yes, I get it. I want to be part of it. And here's my open hand, and I've been talking about this. And I thought, oh yeah, that's right, Corbusier. The moment he heard Nehru was doing a conference, so he wants to butter him up, and he's written a letter and saying, why don't you make open hand your symbol of the non-aligned movement? But it's not true. I went into the archives, and I found that it was in 1948 and 49, when the UN project was going on, that everybody wanted Corbusier to make his politics clear. Which side is he on? Well, they didn't know about his Vichy and stuff, but they wanted, which side are you on? And he refused to do that. And that's when he designed the open hand to say, I'm talking about something else. So this is a very different reading of the open hand, which the old generation might still remember. But this is documented. Main thing over here is Richard Wright, William D. Du Bois. There was a whole series of people from the West, particularly Americans, but also a whole series of Europeans who were completely on board with this thinking. But of course, all the theosophists, etc. This is not just something that was about being in the post-colonies. It was always strongly subscribed to, which is why I think this still has a resonance and followers. Okay, so why did this go this way? This timer, okay. All right. So this is the world this man enters. All right? We have to just produce the imagination that all this history theory is plugged into him. And you can say, well, did he really know all this? Well, how does history act on you? History doesn't always come and explain and say, this is what I want you to do and this is why I want you to do it. History just acts through agents in many diverse ways. So we just work with it. But this, I'm going to say that's the context he was working in. And for my father, the agency that this inscribed was one of critical thinking. I have learned everything I have from Corbusier, even if it's going against him. I think this is very different from, I have learned everything from Corbusier, and I hate Corbusier, I'm going to do what I want to do. This is a third position, all right? It is, again, the work of critiquing and moving beyond what is presented to you. All right. So in what ways? Of course, he had to get married first, so I just wanted to put that in. In 1954, barely 2 years after joining the Capital Project, he made a thing called the Modern Architects Club. And what was the agenda of the Modern Architects Club? Because this was not just a club, this was Chandigarh, and it was the big Nehruvian project, was nothing less than discover the function of man, of course. What else will modernists be doing, right? Fundamentals of Hoff's design, and so on and so forth. So I'm producing this to say that this was ab initio, is not the kind of thing like you got to start every time all over again, but it was to do this new Bauhaus, right, as a kind of a ongoing project. 3 case studies to show you how he thought about this, how he practiced and worked out in this world. Transformation in small incidents. Aditya Prakash had worked closely with Corbusier on the design of this building, which is the School of Art. In 1960, this was 58. In 60, no, this is the School of Art, and this is, in 1960, Aditya Prakash was given the job of designing the School of Architecture. All right? And he argued, well, we all know when Corbusier was designing the School of Art, he was actually designing the School of Architecture. So we should just use the same design. And they could do that because the fact of the matter is, all the work that was done for Chandigarh was work for hire, which includes all the furniture, by the way, which is being sold at exorbitant prices and remade all over Europe and America. All of those designs belong to the government of Punjab because all these people were working as wage architects, hourly paid. But the problem was that the budget of the School of Architecture was 15% less. And in India at that time, most of the cost of the building was materials, all right, not labor. So having a smaller budget gave him an option of either making the building 80% and hope for more money later, or what he chose was to shrink the building. But you can't just shrink Corbusier building. You have to step it through the modular. Right? You can't just put it in a photocopier and say 15% and you're done. So to do that, he got deep into studying the modular to figure out the mathematics of this system of thinking. Not because it's the great master, because he's thinking, oh my God, this is a great universalist way of thinking, so let me find out what it is. And while he's at it, he decides to modify it. Variations to the modular dimensions, and transforms all the dimensions so that they accord, so that they can work with the Indian brick. Because the Indian brick works only in multiples of 3 inches. Yes? Still does it? I think it still does. Whereas Corbusier is pouring concrete. If you're pouring concrete, no problem. You can have any goddamn dimension you want, right? But if you're working with brick, you have to be a multiple without making things very expensive. So he transformed the modular by making the nearest half-inch change. And while he was at it, he added some other dimensions. Some dimensions which do not find place in either may be usefully included, added. So while he was at it, he started to produce his own aesthetic system because he felt it would advance the whole conversation. All right. So this is one small little way in which you do. I'm showing you at a microscopic scale how this works. And that's the difference, the 2 sections overlaid on top of each other. All right? So you might go over there, probably, when you visited France with your groups, you didn't see any difference. But there's a very big difference. And here are the 2 of them overlaid. And then while he was at it, he started to explore this in other media. He always really wanted to be an artist. So the modular became not just a way of organizing the visual reference field. He loved all the lines, and he had this sort of obsessive fascination with the continuous line. So he started to produce artwork around it. And as the artwork was being produced, he started to modify and play around with it and add, quote unquote, new dimensions which may be usefully added. So the swirls started to take their own form and started to produce new figures. I'm sorry, these are blurry. I was looking for them on the train yesterday. I have better quality somewhere. So we find our modular woman, of course, and we find a Shiva dancing Natraj now trying to find his place. And this is where him and Mulk Rajanand got big friends, because this is, in a sense, was very much Mulk Rajanand's project in Marg magazine, was to be able to use not just some kind of a je ne sais quoi hybridization of these things, but to work in a precise manner to produce thought through interferences and productive transformations. That was the job, to not to do something that aesthetically felt like a mix or hybrid and all this kind of stuff that we have been championing for a while, but was actually built into the mechanics of thinking and then produced what it produced. So Mulk Rajanand just really loved all this stuff. And they became big buddies, and I want to show you, he went on and on and on about this, which led him into a journey. Like one day he was in this city called Chennai in South India, and he saw a small little metal sign on the wall. It said School of Architecture. And he's like, WT, where did this School of Architecture come from? And he walked in. It was a temple design school. So he went and spoke to them. He said, okay, well, how do you design temples? And that guy over there basically pulled out a piece of paper, long, narrow strip, and he said, you fold this, then you fold this, then you fold this, then you fold, then you get this proportion, and for this you this proportion. And he said, oh my God. So here's another mechanics. So he got into that. And he said, okay, let me start getting into this. So he went into studies of all these things. Again, not to produce some kind of Indianization, but to understand what were the underlying orders that these people were in search of, with the objective of seeing what are the ways in which he could bring them together. Projects incomplete. He searched, there's a lot of artwork. My most favorite is this one over here, where he has a mandala based on very specific proportions below, and then his modular figure above, with Ganesh sitting in the middle. I feel like it is a Rosetta Stone. One day, it will be able to talk between the two. I keep it right next to my bed. It hasn't spoken to me yet, but hopefully it will. So that's example number one. The second case study is on what Corbusier used to call acoustic space, or ineffable space. Early in his career, while as part of the Chandigarh Capital Project, he was assigned to build a theatre for Rabindranath Tagore. All right, we remember Rabindranath Tagore. It was Tagore's birth centenary in 1962. So all over the nation, Tagore halls were built. Though she built the one, for instance, in Ahmedabad. But there are Tagore halls all over the country. For Aditya Prakash, who was assigned to build this theatre, it immediately became an opportunity to completely think about what, therefore, a theatre has to be. You remember, he was obsessed with English theatre in England. So he was deeply immersed in the argue about the, was the Dennis Lasdon's, the new theatre on the South Bank, National Theatre. Who designed the National Theatre? Where are the UK scholars? Anyway, was it Abercrombie? Anyway, somebody. So here he was big into theatre, so he designed this building, which on the one hand unquestionably has something to do with the miracle box diagrams Corbusier made, right? But when you go into the archives, you find that the way he designed them was through careful, deep internal studies of sight lines, acoustics, throw, banks, a whole series of standard modernist form, follow, function kind of ideology being parsing through his world. So he built this, and then in the end, and then in the end, he simply put a wrapper around it. No window wall. In 2008, 2006 actually, Chandigarh administration decided to renovate this building. And what the fabulous architect, with the complete support of the preservation community, did was that she gutted the entire interior and kept the wall. Because that's what we sell as preservation. As long as it looks okay from the outside, it's preservation. You can do whatever you want inside. Now that's okay if you're talking about the urban fabric of Amsterdam or something, I don't know, right? But it doesn't apply over here, but we put it over there and then you completely don't get it. Right, and so in the one missing book that France did not bring, it's called Preservation as Future Thinking. Like if you want to preserve a certain modernism, the only way to preserve it is to continue its logic with the sort of idea of futurity, which is a much more challenging and difficult task, which is what I'm seeing is already the praxis of a kind of modernism over here. But to return to our protagonist, this project led him to do a series of other theaters. This is Corbusier's Sector 17. I put in some original, sorry about the mess. I just discovered these slides in my dad's archive. But Corbusier laid out this 17 feet 6-inch grid all over the Capitol complex. Relentless. I think it's relentless in the city because of lack of imagination. Because he put down the grid. The point was to put down the grid to play around with it. But our lovely architects just put it down and said, you can't touch it. Prakash got the opportunity to design theaters in it. He designed 2 theaters, Jagat Cinema and Neelam Cinema. These are 2 different ones. And they were designed to be placed within this system. So he placed them and then started to play around within the allowed interior with all sorts of acoustic curves. Although theaters don't require it. And what he will do over here is the interior and produced all these fantastic sort of machinations. He's like producing a sort of idea of interior vision. But it is found in this original drawing that this curve on the outside is intended to be a continuation of the internal acoustic curve over here. But it's somewhat gestural, right? I found out once later when I went to the theater and I studied it and I asked the owner and I said, I want to see that roof. He said, no, that's not how we built it actually. We just put trusses and sent them across. And in the end, we put a fake facade up front to make it look like it has been built this way. And a lot of that was done. If you have been to Chandigarh and you've seen the High Court, all the arches at the top, they are not arches. They are hung from the ceiling with metal ties. Although they were intended and designed as holding up the roof, they don't hold up the roof because that's such a complex hyperbolic geometry that they decided it's easier to just fake it. So there's a lot of this kind of fake stuff in Chandigarh, but that's secrets that nobody tells you about. But this work went into his art, the acoustic curve. He got into it, and it just started to explode in various portions. And given that Corbusier's sort of identification of these curves, not just with the acoustic thinking, but also with solarity. We know this from the door of the assembly and many other things that Corbusier drew out, including the open hand. He started to play with them, and this evolved into a acoustic cosmic vocabulary. All right? The skies, the curves were not just acoustic, but through their acoustics were intended to evoke something that was not apprehendable, right? That's what is meant by acoustic in the philosophical Corbusian modernist sense. In other words, something spiritual. And he entered into that ideas of the cosmos and galaxies, of course, here representing them very strictly, and where he's, all the Hindu temples, for instance, are all models of the universe. They're all intended to be modeling the galaxy. But they are 10th century models of the galaxy, where the earth is still and the sky turns like this. That's what a Hindu temple is. But they're trying to be scientific for the 10th century. So if we want to make a temple today, we have to model the galaxy as it is, or rather the solar system or the Big Bang, whatever your physics is. So that's what he tries to do, starts working all these things in there. And so this becomes, a start to play between architecture and art as, again, search for this modern life. So I made this, had fun. Like, this is the movie that should be played inside the theater to have fun. And this goes on and on. It connects with sort of tantric ideas and shivalings and all those forms in his work. And of course, it moves through Tantra into the classic studies of the female form, which we can discuss and argue about, but they're there everywhere, which resulted in the last of his theaters, which is Casey Theatre, which he finally said and persuaded everybody, forget the grid, I'm just going to go for it. And he produced this theater, and I don't have photographs of it because it's been demolished. So, but I found these old ones. Was a complete freestanding curve in the Corbusian Sector 17 landscape. And these are some old pictures, and with a sort of a crazy interior. I remember it well, but it was an absolutely statement of finally giving up the frame. But if you don't know what it is until you've seen the whole journey that he went through to get to this building over here, this was 1972, yeah. So we have already, it's a whole decade has passed. Okay. And then he did these gas stations, service petrol pumps also, which are beautiful, just gorgeous, with the inverted beams at the top. And these have also all been destroyed because all gas stations now have to have standard international world-class design to fit the company's marketing identities instead of this. These are beautiful curves. So they all stand and over. Okay. While he was building the theater, of course, since he was designing every detail, he obsessed over the chair, all right? And had one of his walls painted in blackboard paint, right? Corbusier had his studio painted at one wall in the blackboard, we all know that, where he used to draw full-size details, and he would draw full-size details over there. And this is a photograph of the chair that he designed, all right? In his words, I wanted a chair that would be comfortable enough for somebody to sit in for a long time, but not so comfortable that they would fall asleep. So I don't know if these chairs fit that bill. And that from there, here are the chairs as installed. These have also all been destroyed, and now you can buy them on Sotheby's for I don't know how much. And then he went on to do a series of other furniture. Including, these chairs that you might recognize, but they are not the same chairs. These are sold all over in auction markets as genre furniture. And they do have a certain lineage from the 30s, which goes to genre and all these other modernists. But everybody who was working over there was told, you're not allowed to cut paste the chair. Now sit down and do it again. But find out what you are thinking. So they're all iterations and transformations. And the most interesting of them then is this chair that he came up with, where he took rebar, steel that would always be lying around, and they were really good at bending rebar for all of Corbusier's building or anywhere else. You had to bend rebar, and it's all bent manually, with if you've been to India, you've seen the systems of bending rebar. So he said, that's great. I can take one rebar and start bending it till it keeps going and makes a whole chair. Well, then he had to add a couple of struts and so to make it stand. But this is the best, so it shows like his obsession with all these things that he was talking about. Okay, last case study. All right. In early 60s, crops failed in India. And because of that, Nehru ended up importing American agricultural technology. It was Kennedy's technology transfer program. Basically, they brought about what is known as the Green Revolution, multiplied the production of wheat in Punjab about 10 to 15-fold, using pesticides and all the things that we are not supposed to. We figured out later that we were not a good idea, but that was what was done in the 1960s. So they needed to do that. A series of universities had to be built so that the technology could be transferred. And Aditya Prakash was assigned to build those universities. So he designed them. And at this period of 5 years, he had already built about 60 to 80 buildings as part of the state architect in Chandigarh. He built an equivalent number of buildings in 4 campuses across Punjab. So here they are. I love this picture because he also got into photography at this time. And here he is showing the new yield that has just been produced with his hostel in the background, saying, that's my building and that's what we achieved, that kind of a thing. And these are the, things from hostels, laboratories, and so on, to pumping stations, all following a certain, modernist vocabulary. And here is when he also started to get back into sculpture and painting, putting this figure in the middle of the agricultural hall, building all these other sculptures, because he was finally working on his own, had his own staff of 20, 30 people, and he could just go, right? So while he was doing this, sorry, I didn't want to give it away. All right, since this was an agricultural university, it involved a whole amount of animal husbandry study, how to work with animals as in the system. So through this experience, Aditya Prakash got deeply reintroduced to the culture of human-animal relations. And he was introduced to it through a very cold technologist way, how to increase milk production, etc., etc., etc. But it revived in him old memories that when he had lost his mother and felt alone, he was assigned the job of milking the cow every day. And for various reasons, whenever he went to milk the cow would become happy, and they sort of had a very strong relationship. And he felt that this is my mother. He didn't say this to anybody. He wrote about this much later in his life, all right, that he had this effect. And when Chandigarh was being built, he went to Jeanneret one day and he said, why don't we put in cows in every house? And he said, are you crazy? And then he said, well, why don't we build with mud? And he said, no, we're going to build with brick and concrete. We're making modern. But it stayed with him. And when he was doing the agricultural university, he had the opportunity to go to all the surrounding villages because milk had to be produced in them, because the cows, etc., had to be, tended over there. And he got back into their systems. He started to study how the animal and human relationships work, not as an aesthetic thing, but to carefully understand how much, where, who, what, how many people needed, how does this whole thing work, all right? So these are all his photographs from that time, right? So he's studying everything, and with 72, 73, when he leaves this agricultural university and returns to Chandigarh as the principal of the College of Architecture. He decides that he is going to make a research project to reintegrate the informal sector, the animal, recycling, and what we call composting back into Chandigarh. That he feels that the way to advance Chandigarh's modernist principles is to splice back in the things that it left out. All right. And he started with the informal sector. Push carts, or what we call rairies, were illegal in Chandigarh because we had beautiful modernist shops, which I love, with good north-facing, nice projection, etc., designed by Jeanneret, Fry, and Corbusier. But he started a research project to reintroduce these. And then based on that, he produced a complete plan about how a new Chandigarh could be made, in where he said the most important thing is to ensure that non-mechanized systems of life would be protected from mechanized systems of life, and insisted that these would have to be separated. So he produced an urban plan in which each sector had recycling, composting, growing of basic food right in the middle of the city, right in the middle of each sector. So instead of a market, he had all these other functions built right into the middle of the city. He had a complete agricultural economy moving parallel. He developed a linear system of the city so that it had effective transportation, and basically produced what he called a self-sustaining city utopian blueprint for infinite urbanism, because he's a modernist. Nothing short of infinite and perfect will do for him, right? So no courtyards and no jharokas and no jalis. But he did this in the 1970s, precisely in the context when postmodernism was going big. And all the Indian architects were studying neighborhoods in Jaipur or Old Delhi or step wells of Ahmedabad and so on, trying to produce aesthetic orders that make them look that way. He said, you want an Indian city? That's an Indian city. So he got into real serious fights with many of his best friends who were famous name architects of the time, like this is what we do. So that's what he got, and he, I remember these things. He would have these models. That's him. That's me on the other side, trying to show how this city would work. And yeah, for him, this was not a contradiction. You move from here to here, right? This is not this replacing this. For him, this was meant to work in a way that both keeps what is over here and transforms it into a modernist vocabulary. Anyway, I'll move through this. So this unleashed in him the sort of the third and last of his major obsessions, which was a deep love for animals of every kind. All right, he both as an emotional character level because of his particular history, but also because he knew of the sort of cultural, social value that can be had from having intimate relations between animals and humans. And this was not meant to be a solution, most importantly, for India. This was, from his perspective, something that was missing and lost, for instance, in the West. We've destroyed it, and it has resulted in these awful, huge, animal farms, in the food industry, meat industry is just really, really, really awful. But when you had a sort of a more intimate relationship, the idea for him was not to be nostalgic about it, but to see its intrinsic and fundamental value, and therefore design futuristic cities which would build those ways of living into the core of it. which unleashed a series of artworks. You know, he had to incorporate the animal into. The vast body of his work, of which I have about over 100 paintings, maybe in about 500 or 600 drawings, explore the animal in all their glories. Of course, in modernist forms, with continuous lines, and in relationship to land and architecture and various kind of architecture things, which I think Marek once described as flat architecture. So, you know, I don't know how to look at this. I need help on trying to figure out what this is all about. But there is something in here which what this is about. Okay. So to end. So the Chandigarh ethos, as I see here, when I see all this, the continuous line for me, as I've tried to present, is not trying to produce something like a Gesamtkunstwerk or something like a perfect, all organized, well orchestrated aesthetic reality. All right. The continuous line is using all the instruments together to think about the possibilities of living. And each one of those projects advances at a different pace, and sometimes they connect and sometimes they don't. But that's the line that goes through it. And it's not a line about identity, it's a line about futurity, about how to put it. And this is, you know, the modernist project itself. I want to emphasize that he was part of an ethos. This is Yuli Chowdhury, this is J.K. Chowdhury, this is Jeetlal Malhotra, this is M.N. Sharma, this is B.P. Mathur. I put Corbusier in, here is Shivdat Sharma, etc. This was the ethos. Everybody was doing it in various ways. Aditya Prakash just happened to be prolific, and he bloody worked day and night. I don't know what he did. He produced, but this was everybody's work. And so there is a whole body to be known. And for all of them, that's the sort of thing we try to show in this exhibition, that there are all these people that are trying to produce, that if you want to think about the Chandigarh ethos, then it is not the, you know, the beautiful buildings that Jeanneret did, which he did, but it is about a way of thinking and building in the world, and a project which, most importantly, as far as I am concerned, particularly today, when it is under vicious attack by the new nationalist government of India and various neo-nationalist governments around the world. The modernist project has never been under more vicious attack around the world, is to understand that this is a project, what it was trying to do, had a lot of its challenges, but I believe has the resilience that in the longer run will, through critique, transformation, rethinking, and reimagining, still needs to be preserved, not as something gone, but of a future yet to come. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this great lecture. All the beautiful stories and pictures and all. I'm really, really loved it. And I think we should try to bring indeed this exhibition somewhere here in the Netherlands, hopefully in Rotterdam. Let's think about that. I just want to ask, maybe there are questions or remarks from the audience that somebody wants to, now you can take your chance, so. Yeah.
Hi. Well, this was a wonderful introduction to this world, and what I'm interested in to know more about where the project that this group of architects created, to what extent was there a debate or even implementation of or questioning on the idea of a building culture, of a material culture, within Chandigarh as a sort of from the viewpoint of a non-aligned modernism,
You mean
especially from the last few images that you've showed of Aditya Prakash visiting the villages, being inspired about what he saw there.
I'm going to take your question literally. I mean, to what extent was materials and building and construction and ways of putting things together part of the innovative thinking? Is this the...
Was it questions?
It was, absolutely. So the whole city project that I showed started with an argument about the mud wall. So Jeanneret was building new types of building, new ways of building walls with random rubble masonry, because there were all this river rock in the area. So my father brought in and he said, well, you keep talking about the villages all the time, and we know Corbusier was obsessed with the villages. Why don't we build with mud? And he said, oh, okay, let's try. And they built a series of mud walls, and many of them failed. Orwell wasn't there as yet, yes? So, and they abandoned the project. So then it lay abandoned for 10, 15 years till my father revived it when he started to do the city. And in fact, he was working with a lot of the technologies, early people at Orwell and the ferrocement people. So what I'm trying to say is, you can say, well, Chandigarh abandoned it because they continued to build with brick, which later on became more of a problem. But I would say that people like my father and a lot of the other sort of foundational studies that were done in this direction early on in India did come out of this ethos. So that's what, yeah. Is that what you were asking? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, question, Vikram. Thank you for this lecture, which I learned a lot from, especially about this, the non-aligned movement and the building of the third world, which I think I should have known because I studied Nkrumah's nation building in the 60s. And then it was Doxiadis and not Le Corbusier who did this building. But I wanted to ask you about one aspect of that, namely the housing. You mentioned that your father in the 50s started this club studying the basics of housing organization. And in Ghana, I was surprised to see that the housing types that were built there introduced the idea of the nuclear family, which were not indigenous to Ghana and the way people lived. So I always interpreted that as a sort of a Western import. And now I'm curious to hear about what your father studied about these housing principles and what they did with it.
Yeah, this is a very early stage as a project I'm starting to work on, is how the domestic space was organized. So for instance, in Chandigarh, traditionally there'd be the house, it was in a compound, and the kitchen used to be always at the edge at the backyard. And then there'd be the backyard, and then the toilets were at the boundary wall. Why? So that the toilet could be served by the untouchables from the alley, and so that the women would cook in the kitchen, which was at the edge of the house. Of course, that allowed the smoke also to get out, but it kept the kitchen as a sort of a serving area at the back of the house. So the modernists early on decided that the kitchen and the toilet have to be moved into the center of the house. And they put in regulation to ensure that this was the case for all the housing. Now, is that westernization? Well, maybe it is. But for them, this was part of the mandate of building of Chandigarh. So I haven't, I know there are other people who know Ghana and other West African architecture much better. But in all this case, these were all processes I would think of thinking. This is not to say there wasn't a kind of a neo-colonialist, we want to do Western mentality also at play. This has always been the case, still there in India, still there in everywhere. We want to be cool, we want to be like New York, if we want to be like Paris, or we want to be like West. There's always these sort of colonial hierarchies and hangovers. But in the modernist definition, in which the ethos that was being put out, this was not about Westernization. This was about continuing a modernist universalist project, which is how I like to look at it, which can only be, when you look at the different register, when we talk about global modernism and we say modernism was always a global heritage, then it's not a problem to see these as part of a continued, just not Indian heritage, but that doesn't mean it's Western. Just because it's not Indian heritage does not mean it's Western, is all I'm trying to say, yeah. I think that's the shorter summary, yeah. Yes.
Thanks for a great lecture. Okay, thank you, really love the storytelling. And I'm just, was thinking of a kind of mirror story. So I've just finished Arundhati Roy's Mother Mary Comes to Me,
yeah.
A beautiful book. And as a kind of counter story, the question I have is, does this version of non-aligned, I would say non-aligned world building, or non-aligned modernism,
yeah, sure, yeah.
Need a strong man? Because in Roy's book, where she's in Kerala, or influenced by that ethos, which is kind of bottom-up communist self-organizing, it's the woman, it's the mother around whom the world is centered. Whereas there seems to be very, looking at the images, there's one woman there, but it is somehow this kind of a patriarchal, perhaps, system that is organizing this third world. And history in Ghana, like for instance, when Nkrumah goes, the project collapses. When Nasser goes in Egypt, they're similar. So these strong Tito, so these strong figures seem necessary to sustain the idea. And I'm just interested in whether the final project you presented with the bicycle and this turn to the kind of informal city, what we might call that today, isn't a recognition of another world, like a fourth world. Yeah.
Yes, sure. I mean, so the first part. Yeah, these are big men. No questions about this, right? And that is both simply how it is and a fault. All right? Just because these are big men doesn't make it bad. That doesn't certify big men. No questions about that. And there is a problem with that. There is not to that. But does that therefore mean, and look, Laurie Baker and, that's that whole that critique that came. I would argue came out of a pretty reductive reading of modernism, right? Even wonderful people like Laurie Baker, sort of simplified modernism. Laurie Baker was a visitor in Chandigarh. He had been to our house. He knew my dad, right? I don't think if Laurie Baker, well, I don't want to argue with Arundhati Roy, right? So there is a different way to write that narrative. And a lot of the sort of critiques can be seen as, I would like to see them as continuations and critiques and movement onwards of modernist practices. So maybe it is the Fourth World Project, and maybe it's the Woman Earth Project, but I wouldn't call it a not modernist project. That's all. Yeah, because they get presented as not modernist projects. So, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I see 2 more questions. 3, and then
We can go as long as you
Oh,
like.
okay.
Get some wine out.
First of all, thank you for such an amazing presentation and lecture. I learned a lot. I have a comment and a question. The comment is, maybe it's me that I see the glass always half full, but I notice from the non-aligned movement to the ethos of the modernism, and even as the attitude of the student not going beyond the master, but just learning and then contradicting, going beyond.
Yeah.
I got this feeling of going beyond in all 3 layers.
Yeah.
And this fills me with optimism. My second, so my question is then, how do you see then now, since you said that modernism was never more at risk as it is today, under attack, how do you see the modernism going beyond nowadays in the current world?
Well, I think the whole climate movement and what is called planetarity, and even I would argue certain kinds of feminisms, are all dedicated to a certain critical modernism. You know, I see all these projects as doing the ongoing work. Now, all of them are under attack right now, right? At least where I live, it's awful, right? But in India too, I don't know what it is like here in Europe, but I imagine it's maybe not that different, but maybe it is, I don't know. So my thinking, I like the glass half full, glass 3/4 full, whatever you want. Because I was talking to Sunil Khilnani, anyway, different, no. See, if you look at this, if early modernist history, you know, just as political, you know, let's say 100 years of American history, United States history. The challenges that the basics of democracy had to face in United States history, which it continues to face till this day, have been tremendous, right? There were many times that such challenges, including during the Civil War and then during Jim Crow and so on and so forth, were put up, which said, oh, well, it's all over, forget it. The sort of modernist ethos was very severely challenged. I would just simply like to think that these are all tests, you know, to sort of by the neck. You got it or not? So it becomes even more important to, you know, continue to invest in them, because nobody else is going to do the climate crisis or decolonization. The backbone of the climate crisis and decolonization, and a certain reading of feminism, is all from the way I read it in modernist reading. Now you can call it non-aligned or not, or you can call it another kind of modernism, you can call it whatever modernism you want to call it, but it is still a modernist reading, or a third world modernist, or a planetary modernism. There are all these sort of circus of modernisms going around nowadays. I have no problems with all of them. I like non-aligned because that was an important political thing, which has a real identifiable history, which is a forgotten project, which I think is an extremely important political project that I like to put my anchor on. And there was one,
Hi. Thanks so much for a wonderful lecture. Something that I really liked and haven't heard a lot about before was the connection with animals and the animal world and the warmth of it and the naturalness of it. And it made me wonder about plants, not in an agricultural sense, but more in a sense of living with a natural environment. Can you speak a bit about that?
Yeah, Donna Haraway didn't get to my dad, but yeah, but he always approached plants, again through his agricultural university experience, in this sort of way, like we've got to know what they are and what our relationships with them, and therefore built what we would call today ecological transhuman relationships with them. But it was still very much through a register of, he always had the numbers right next to him. How much this you need, how much this, how much water, how much going on. So he had always a kind of a technocratic viewpoint a little bit. But nevertheless, I think he loved this book called The Secret Life of Plants. I don't know if you know, it's an old, early 70s cult book. Because I think he secretly thought that, communicating and sort of having intimate relationships with plants would be a real thing in the future. And I think now we are coming to it. In our post-human kind of, I don't know who you were referring to when you were thinking about, I immediately think of Donna Haraway and this whole West Coast Santa Cruz school of thought. And I've done a series of conceptual projects called Kishkinda, New York, and what if New York and Manhattan was a forest? And so we make the argument that the Amazon is the most inhabited place on Earth, except we are not really there, Well, no, so it's the densest, biggest metropolis. So we need to learn from the Amazon, not, so what would Manhattan? Anyway, we like to do these kind of conceptual projects. So, but I think some of this thinking is version 4.0 of the same city. But yeah, absolutely.
And then you, and then I think you can.
Okay, two more questions. Yeah.
Thank you so much for such a lovely presentation and storytelling. I think it was really enjoyable. And my question was more towards the language that you showed one of these slides with the architectural works of Mr. Malhotra and Mr. Sharma, who were also contemporaries of Aditya Prakash that way. And I think I wanted to know how the design language kind of evolved between these people, because there was also this whole framework set up by Jeanneret and Corbusier in some ways, right? So how did it kind of differ amongst them, because they were also contemporaries? Could you throw some light on that?
Yeah, everybody was trying to be different. Men. And by the way, Yuli, there is a huge, we're finding out, there's a lot of work that is available on Yuli, and Yuli's story is very interesting. And I'm getting to that, that needs to be done. But there were two types of things. Bunch of people were doing works just to be a little different. And I just have to, I suppose, admit that without really having done some deep and serious research into everybody else. But most of them, in one way or the other, were trying to advance the project in their own ways. Certainly that was the case with Jeetlal Malhotra. He did all these things, and he went on to build with Indira Gandhi and all the canal systems that she was building. Then he went on in Delhi, So he went on and on and on and on and did his version of things, right? Unfortunately, several of them, like 4 of them died very young. And Yuli Chowdhury, who was, in fact, while she was chief architect of Punjab, by our estimation, did over 100 buildings as chief architect of Punjab. That entire archive is sitting there. They are, in fact, very open. We went to them and we said, we wanted these drawings. They're like, sure, come on in. Here they are. Take pictures. Let us know when you're done. It's like, what? So there's a huge archive, and we showed about 8 of her drawings in the exhibition. And that was literally weeks before the exhibition that we got access to them. So, all this work still needs to be done about all these other. The whole problem was that with postmodernism, with the 70s and early 80s, when the Doshis and the Koreas and the Rajrivals and the Laurie Bakers and everybody sort of took over the narrative to be doing anything of value in India, even in the modernist mold, you had to be doing a certain iteration of modernism, a certain iteration of Indianism, historicist Indianism. And that hijacked the entire narrative. And that hijacking of that narrative was done on the grounds that the Chandigarh project dropped the ball. That the Chandigarh architects should have transformed Chandigarh into a more Indian city. They didn't do it, we are going to do it. So, In 1970, 69, 70, Charles Correa was still doing New Bombay. It was a thoroughly modernist project, right? For its ills, better or for worse. But by the time you see him in the 80s, you don't know what the hell he's doing from my wanted. So all that work needs to be done. If you want to do a PhD on this, let's talk.
That's a good invitation. Last question.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Vikram. I love the way you integrate your father's visual art production with the other projects, and also the arcs were very compelling. And I was wondering if there's maybe an arc in the case studies that you presented as well, and not just historically, because there was a the Indian modular, right, based on bricks and a 3-inch module, but then you also came up with the Ganesh mandala connection that was beautiful, and then there was the acoustic cosmic vocabulary for the Tagore theater, but then you ended with the urban agricultural revolution and what was that beautiful picture of a grid where you were holding the strings with your father. And to me, it struck me, when I first saw that, I thought, okay, that's like a modular system thrown out over the world. But it also reminded me of the beginning of your lecture of Gandhi's model of contiguous villages, right? Where when he was asked about mass production, he said, I believe in that, but production by the masses, right? But it's almost like a formalization of the Gandhian villages that are contiguous with green in between, and each module, and so it's not just top down with strings, it's also bottom up.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting.
Just a thought.
Yeah, no, not bottom up in the sort of pedagogy of the oppressed manner, but in a different way. Yeah, you're so right, Marek. I completely forgot about that, because my father was obsessed with Gandhi. And his, in a sense, one level, I'm going to add that into this lecture, thank you, his project was to merge the Gandhian project with the Nehruvian project. Because really the Nehruvian project kind of went this way, and the Gandhianists all went Laurie Baker, and NGO, right? But he was obsessed with bringing them together. Yeah, but of course it's still kind of top down in his worldview, but not bottom up in the sort of a classical, it is infinite, but definitely each sector in his city was a village, but a village that functioned like a village, not a village that looked like a village,
Thank you. I think this is a good closing word. And I don't know, Michelle, but maybe I think that he should come more and teach more. Yeah, so we will invite you again, I think, in the future, because we really want to thank you for this great story and the great lecture that you gave, and an applaud again. And you are also at the bar when people have questions. Then okay, so come to the bar and then have a lovely evening.